My name is Caroline Lawton, and I'm an Associate Manager of Peace and Recovery here at Innovations for Poverty Action. We are excited to host today's webinar as part of the Humanitarian Protection Initiative. Today we'll discuss emerging evidence on strategies to limit harm caused by landmines ahead of International Mine Awareness and Assistance in Mine Action Day happening on April 4th. Before we get started, I'll provide a quick overview of the work that HPI is doing. The goal of the Humanitarian Protection Initiative is to crowd in and share new evidence to inform policies and programs that can prevent and mitigate harm to communities in acute conflict settings. HPI is a partnership between IPA and JPAL, and it's supported by UK Development Aid. Joining areas are prevention of sexual and gender-based violence, addressing the psychological effects of abuse and distress, promoting the recognition and respect and uptake of rights, and mitigating conflict escalation while fostering restraint among armed actors. HPI has supported over 20 projects across 11 different countries. Today, we're excited to share two HPI-supported projects examining strategies to reduce harm caused by landmines and explosive ordnance. I'll mostly leave it to the panelists to motivate these projects, but to give a quick overview, explosive ordnance, including landmines, cluster munitions, and improvised explosive devices, or IEDs, affect civilians in conflict and post-conflict zones globally. These weapons kill or injure thousands of civilians every year across dozens of countries, with the burden falling heaviest on communities in active or recent conflict zones, where clearance is low, slow, health systems are fragile, and economic consequences of contamination, like restricted movement, abandoned farmland, reduced access to markets and schools, compound the direct physical harm. Burkina Faso and Myanmar illustrate both dimensions of this problem. Burkina Faso is after a decade of Sahel insecurity, has produced heavy IED contamination and a trauma system stretched such that the majority of casualties can take more than 12 hours to reach care. In Myanmar, landmine contamination has intensified dramatically since the 2021 coup, making Myanmar one of the most heavily landmine contaminated countries in the world. This threatens not only physical safety, but the mobility that communities depend on to farm, trade, and access schools. First presentation shares early results from a pilot evaluation in Burkina Faso, testing whether layperson first responder training integrated directly into existing mine action activities can reduce preventable mortality. We'll then hear from the team behind an ongoing RCT in Myanmar, providing information on mine locations to communities with the goal of increasing mobility. To save on time, I will only briefly introduce them, but we are very lucky to have 6 panelists who are deeply immersed in these topics. Dr. Hannah Wild is a medical resident at University of Washington. Commander Jean-Sylvestre Kurogo is the permanent secretary of the National Commission of the Control of Arms. Dr. Juan Rodrigo Diao is the director of the Burkina Emergency Response Operations Center. Dr. Sergey Elaine Tugma is the operations lead of the Burkina Emergency Response Operations Center. And then we'll hear from Dr. Travis Basler, assistant professor at the University of Rochester, and Mr. Beckham Shalla, the regional director of Community Safety Partnerships. Some housekeeping notes. We will begin with presentations from our panelists, and then open the floor to questions from the audience. If you would like to ask any questions, please submit it through the Q&A function in Zoom. You're welcome to share your name and affiliation if you're comfortable doing so that our panelists will know who the question is coming from. And you may submit questions at any time, but we will likely hold off on them until the end. We may not be able to answer all questions, and we do apologize for that in advance. This webinar is being recorded and will be available on IPA's website after the event, and we encourage you to share the link with colleagues who may be interested. Okay, now over to Dr. Hannah Wild, who will kick us off.
Good morning, and thanks for the introduction, Ms. Lawton. Let me just go ahead and share my screen. Confirming that everyone can see my slides in presenter mode. take that as a yes. As Ms. Lawton shared, we have the honor of talking about a project which seeks to pilot combined explosive ordnance risk education with community first aid responder training for communities in Burkina Faso affected by the threat of improvised explosive devices, or IEDs. I'm honored to be joined today by our national partners, both from the Emergency Response Unit of the Ministry of Health, represented by Dr. Tugma, and also Commandant Korogo with the National Arms Control Commission. The motivation for this project, many low-resource conflict and post-conflict settings are affected by the threat of explosive ordnance. And in these contexts, mortality rates among local casualties are much higher than what we observe in high-resource trauma systems. There are many reasons for this. One is often the lack of formal pre-hospital care and delays to care. In these situations, it's often possible that bystanders or community members may be the only care available at the point of injury. There have been many what we call layperson first responder trainings. The WHO has recently created what they call CFAR for community first aid responder training, which is designed to address this gap, equipping communities with the skills to provide basic life-saving care until a person can either be transferred to a higher level of care or a trained healthcare personnel can arrive. This isn't a new concept, and it's actually been tested before in landmine affected regions back in the 1990s in Iraq and Cambodia. This was a broader study which also trained pre-hospital personnel, so not just community members, but they succeeded in reducing trauma-related mortality in their areas by from about 40 to 15%, so very successful. But despite that success, this hasn't been scaled in landmine or explosive ordnance affected regions globally. So we see that as an implementation problem. Meanwhile, humanitarian mine action organizations conduct what they call explosive ordnance risk education in conflict and post-conflict settings globally, which are affected by the threat of explosive ordnance. So we thought that this would be a good opportunity to integrate layperson first responder trainings, which for the rest of this talk, I'm going to be using the WHO type CFAR, with explosive ordnance risk education to try and reach, basically magnify the impact, not only injury prevention, but also equipping communities with response in the skills needed to respond in the event an incident were to occur. We set out to pilot this. To our knowledge, it's the first time that joint delivery of explosive ordnance risk education and CFAR training has been done. Our pilot was conducted with Mines Advisory Group and their local partners in several regions of Burkina Faso. This is an outdated map, not accurate. Commandant Korogo and his colleagues possess the up-to-date information, but our pilot regions were in Dedugu and Benfora. We first set out to conduct a qualitative analysis. The purpose of this was to understand baseline needs and adapt the CFAR curriculum to the local context to make sure that it was done appropriately. In order to do this, we conducted 11 focus group discussions and 21 key informant interviews over multiple affected regions of Burkina Faso. These included healthcare personnel, truck drivers on affected routes, and covered content ranging everything from the impact of IEDs to access to healthcare, as well as the nitty-gritty of training details, just what day and what location it would be safe and advisable to conduct trainings. Is it okay to train men and women together? Can animal meat be consumed after it's used in training simulations? Overall, this led to the development of an open access toolkit, which we'll be sharing in a forthcoming publication so that other operators and research groups can adapt combined EURE and CFAR training to their context. It also provided a valuable qualitative analysis of the profound impact of IEDs, particularly in areas where these catastrophic injury types aren't common. There's physical effects, psychological effects, not only on communities, but on the surgeons caring for these populations. On the bottom is a truck. One of the truck drivers in our focus group had been behind a large vehicle involved in an IED incident, and his windshield was shattered and repainted along those lines. So touching really all domains of the population. So we used the information that we gathered from key stakeholders to adapt our own version, which was purely trauma-focused of a broader WHO CFAR curriculum. And we used a training of trainer model in the two regions that we chose. You can see some of the preliminary totals to date on both the local trainers trained and then the community members that they've trained. Some initial apprehensions included, yes, some of these individuals are community health workers, but the baseline level of education is not high. These are community members. Meanwhile, the original CFAR curriculum was designed potentially for, police officers or people with a higher level of education. Nonetheless, as exemplified by this woman on the right, we found that practical skills acquisition was rapid and effective. These are people who have their daily lives require a high level of competence. And we were incredibly impressed with our local trainers and proud of the work they've gone on to do in communities. We are implementing a multi-pronged evaluation. So not just confidence scores, which are often the only thing reported for outcomes, but objective pre and post tests. I won't rehash the actual numbers, but thus far the results have been very positive, as well as we have a matrix that we've developed, and all of these evaluation tools will be made open access for others seeking to implement similar programs for the key skills taught in this. And these are all organized to prioritize the most life-threatening injuries, for example, control of hemorrhage or bleeding from an isolated extremity, which is a cause of preventable death that could easily be addressed in the community. On the left, you see our trainers leading trainings in their own communities. Unfortunately, this was an ID that was spotted by one of our own teams, and we are currently in the process of gathering data on results from training at the community level after an initial pilot and then quality assurance and repeat training to ensure that what was being delivered at that level is accurate. We're also collecting incident reports. Again, unfortunately, this was another incident that our own trainees responded to in one of their regions, so that we have at least a basic sense of how these skills are being used, which is, of course, not only for conflict-related injury. This on the left is a gunshot wound that was cared for, but we also have, road traffic accidents and other nonviolent trauma that these skills are pertinent to. Not only at the local level, but on an international level, this is gaining traction. Based on these preliminary results, there have been multiple other mine action operators piloting this in other regions, including the Thai-Myanmar border, at least for contextual analysis, Tigray, Syria, and Afghanistan exploratory work. So we're really hopeful that this is a model that can be successful in other settings. At an international treaty level, this was adopted actually as a new action point in the 5-year action plan that was negotiated in Cambodia to prioritize integrated layperson first responder training in communities affected by explosive ordnance. So we're proud and excited to have done the first pilot in Burkina. And above all, so these are two of my colleagues who aren't here with me today, Dr. Patrick and Dr. Fabrice. They're two local doctors and brothers functionally who are our local trainers. They led all of our pilot trainings and they helped train now our national partners after we showed the initial feasibility and efficacy of this model. We are partnering with CHORUS, which is the French abbreviation for the Emergency Response Unit of the Ministry of Health. And I don't have the logo for Commandant Korogo's CNCA, National Arm Control Commission, but these are the two key national partners that we're seeking funding to hand over these activities and conduct across Burkina Faso in regions affected by insecurity. So thank you so much for your time. I am available for questions after. But now really honored to be joined by our national partners, and we'll hand the floor to Commandant Korogo.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Anna. Well,
C'est bon.
good afternoon, everyone. I will speak in English to save time. I will start my presentation with a couple of slides to talk about the National Commission. Actually, the National Commission in Burkina Faso is structured as such, 4 levels, but the most important one are the last two ones, the Permanent Secretariat and the Regional Committee. So, and this structure is actually linked straight to the Prime Minister. So we get all authorizations from him and we go back to him for all activities. So what we do is actually the compliance, the security enforcement, and actually our collaboration with the different structures and civil society organizations linked to the IDs and weapons control. And also, we try to educate people about the danger of small arm and light weapon, LPC, and IDs. So at the national level, we have a strategic document. The first one is about ID. So everything we do, we try to comply with this document. And then we have two other ones. The last one is actually about man action standard in compliance with the international regulations. About the crisis in Burkina Faso, actually everything started in 2015. So now from that period, the threat shift from ALPC, light weapons, to a combined, let's say, threat using lighter weapons and IDs. At the national level, the government has different tools to respond to that threat, and the National Commission is actually one of these tools. And we try to provide, let's say, the mining mechanism. We have a national structure to demand, and also we help support, let's say, the victims. We have a national system to support the victim of IDs along the territory. And but at that level, what I can say is that from the beginning, around 2015, 2017, the victims were we had around 729 IDs incident with 1,433 victims. And around April 2024 to last year, we had over 116 civilian victims. These figures are, let's say, are largely underestimated. And it was UN Mass at that time who were in charge to collect all the incidents and make a report. So this is officially what we know about what happened in terms of IDs incident. So overall, we have 1,700 total victims and around 800, let's say, fatalities. So this is our relationship with Dr. Anna. We work with her when it comes to educate about the threat of IDs. And at that level, what we do is to help train the trainers and provide official accreditation to the different teams that will work on the field, and also provide supervision to these teams. This is actually what we do in terms of activities with this project. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And I think now we'll pass it on to Dr. Sergey Alain Tugma, who will share a bit more about the Burkina Faso context.
Dr. Tugma, votre micro et puis caméra s'est coupé. Merci. Voilà.
Là, c'est bon?
Oui, oui, c'est bon maintenant. Merci beaucoup. Vas-y.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are. Thank you for agreeing to our participation in this meeting, which is of great strategic importance to us. I'm Dr. Tugma, Head of Operation at the Public Health Emergency Operations Center in Burkina Faso. And I'm giving this presentation on behalf of its director, Dr. Diao Watan Rodrigue. It is a pleasure to present our mission, experience, and crisis management in Burkina Faso. Slide.
Il faut cliquer sur l'écran.
Yes.
Voilà.
Thank you, Anna. Our presentation will focus on the following point. We have introduction, vision, mission, experience, and emergency management activities and prospect. In Burkina Faso, it is a country in West Africa as committed to establishing a strong institution for crisis management. It was in this context that CORIS was established on 18 October 2026 as a technical department of the National Institute of Public Health. It is responsible for health surveillance and coordinating the response to health risk. After 8 years in evidence, there's been many achievements and shortcomings. The vision of CORIS is to ensure leadership in collective preparedness, coordination, and operation management related to health risk and emergencies in Burkina Faso. And our mission, we have 6 main objectives, which are ensure strategic surveillance on public health events, and we have conduct and coordinate necessary investigation for any event likely to lead to a health crisis. We have preparedness operational response modality, including a regional and district level. And we have a coordinated response activation in accordance with SOP and principle according our money to work. Since its inception, CORIS has been activated almost every year to manage emergencies. I would like to draw the attention of our distinguished audience to the following non-medical activation. We have a 2019 Yigu tragedy and management of healthcare service disruption due to the health worker strike. And the important is the resilience of a health system in area with precarious security. And here are 3 case CORIS activity that could be integrated with Dr. Anna, with the activities suggested in partnership with Dr. Anna, namely the integration of first aid and education on explosive device. And the training for rapid team, the last session of work of which took place in 2021 has benefited of 85 teams. There is also training in the management of psychological trauma with 10 out of 13 regions having received this training. Finally, there is training in the management of mass casualty incidents. All these activities require support to ensure they can be carried out on the regular basis. Together with Dr. Anna, we conduct a pilot training program for CORIS staff on first and awareness of a risk posed by explosive devices. We then strengthen our collaboration with a meeting between WILD team, Vicencia, and MAG. We are planning to train stakeholder in Banfora in first aid and area. However, we are currently seeking funding to scale up the initiative to the others 12 regions. It is the substance of my presentation, and I would like to thank everybody for your attention. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much,
Anna,
Dr. Tuba.
thank you.
If you wouldn't mind stopping sharing your screen, we'd appreciate it. And I'll hand it over to Dr. Travis Basler, who will take us to the other side of the world to work in Myanmar, um, that to talk about an ongoing RCT that he is currently doing in partnership with community safety partnerships.
Thank you, Caroline. And thanks everybody for joining today. So I'm Travis Bosler, an assistant professor of economics at the University of Rochester. I'll leave it to somebody to interrupt me if you can't see the slides or if there's any audio problem. Otherwise, I'll just proceed. So I'll be telling you today about an ongoing project that I have with a couple folks from the World Bank, Suchuta Semperoy and Roy van der Weide, thinking about landmine awareness programs in Myanmar. So we don't have results yet because I don't know what they are yet, though we're hoping to within the next couple of weeks. And so we thought this would be a nice time to share the design with you, tell you why we think what we're doing is important and what we'll be looking at, and then we can follow up over the next few months. So we're thinking here about what mine action should look like in times and places of active conflict, keeping in mind that while injuries and deaths are certainly the most devastating impacts that landmines have, they're not the only ones. Living near landmines in places with serious landmine contamination certainly reduces people's mobility. It makes it harder to operate your farm. It makes it harder to travel to the market to buy and sell goods. It makes it harder to take your kids to school if you don't know where potential explosives are. There could also be persistent psychological stress, right? Just from living every day under the very serious threat of explosive contamination. So the ideal solution here is clearance, obviously, right? Get rid of the mines if possible. The trouble is that in periods of active conflict, that's often not feasible. Those mines were put there by armed groups for a reason. Those armed groups are still active and typically are not going to allow independent organizations to come in and clear those mines away. That usually at best has to wait until after the conflicts are over. So our big question is what can be done to help households cope in the meantime? And so we study a program that I imagine most, if not all of you are familiar with, the Explosive Ordnance Risk Education Program. This is a program used by many mine action organizations across the world. The components vary a little bit based on what's feasible and what's useful in a given setting, but typically include awareness sessions on helping people recognize and avoid mine hazards. Kids are of particular interest here because they often play in contaminated areas and may not be able to recognize what is or isn't a landmine. And so these sessions focus on teaching the kids how to avoid those hazards. Targeted messaging for high-risk behaviors like scrap metal handling, which obviously exposes people to significant risk. Coordination with other actors who can respond to events like healthcare organizations, right, where that's possible and relevant. And then community safety mapping, which involves sharing localized information about where known mine hazards are and which routes are safe and unsafe in a given area. So programs like this are delivered throughout Myanmar already. In our study, they'll be delivered by various partners, all coordinated through community safety partnerships. The reason we think this study is important is that, as I mentioned, EOR is widely implemented across the world, and there's essentially no rigorous evidence on its long-term impacts on the households that receive it. So what we do know from existing studies is that EOR improves knowledge. Right? So we know that people who are exposed to the program afterward can better identify explosive hazards than they could before. We don't know economic impacts, we don't know welfare impacts, we don't even really know safety impacts. Though I should mention that we don't see our studies primarily focused on testing whether learning about how to identify landmine hazards is useful from a health and safety perspective. Our view is that the answer there is sufficiently obviously yes. Why? Because we're talking about people living in highly contaminated areas who are demonstrating significant improvements in their revealed ability to identify these hazards. Okay, so really our focus is on potential economic benefits and potential mental well-being benefits from being able to better identify which routes are safe and where hazards are located around you. Those impacts are probably less obvious. That's what we're setting out to test. So what do? We are running a randomized controlled trial testing the value of EOR throughout Myanmar. So we're working in almost 1,000 villages, which were randomized to either receive an EOR program or not. I should mention we're focusing on medium risk areas. We're not working in the highest risk areas. And the reason is not because we don't think EOR is useful there. Actually, it's probably the most useful in high risk areas. But we wanted to avoid randomizing villages out from receiving a program that they would likely very much need in a location that we determined was high risk. So we didn't think that would be an ethical thing to do. So the way we implemented that was, we drew the list of villages we wanted to work in. We sent them to our partner and said, please tell us which of these, you or your partners are planning to go to in the future. We remove those from the randomization set and are just working in those that remain. So think about this as the value of EOR in places where there's moderate amounts of contamination, where mine action groups are not necessarily able to cover completely without additional funding, not the impact of EOR in the most important areas to reach. Right? That's just harder to study. So data come from about 4,000 household surveys conducted once before and once after the households received the EOR program. The interventions were delivered throughout the second half of last year. And as I mentioned, we're focusing on, while our goal is not to demonstrate the safety value add of EOR, we are of course measuring safety outcomes. So we'll know whether people have experienced exposure to explosive devices, but our focus really is on economic and well-being outcomes. Okay, so while we measure injuries and safety outcomes, we're focusing on are people more likely to be employed? Unemployment is extremely high in rural Myanmar. Are people better able to use the land that they own? Right? Is farming increasing as access to these places improves? If we see improvements on outcomes like that, which hopefully we do, then as we try to understand why those outcomes are changing, we'll be looking at whether knowledge and beliefs are improving, right? Whether people are better able to detect hazards, and whether mobility is increasing, whether we see more travel within and outside the village, to and from markets, for example, to and from places of work. We'll look at broader impacts on measures of income, measures of household consumption, and of course, psychological well-being. We'll look at whether reported stress, anxiety, and so on are decreasing. And then, of course, we'll also be interested in spillovers. And what I mean by that is it's typically not possible to deliver EOR to every single person in a village. Some people are not interested, or they don't have time, they're not there on the day that the program is delivered. An important thing to understand is when EOR is delivered to a community, how many people in the community actually benefit from that new information. So we'll try to measure how much the information is spreading throughout the village, because we're talking to many different households. I was asked to talk about challenges of working in this context, and there are many. Most obvious is security and access. So we're working in a context with ongoing violence, and that means basically that you have to have exceptional field partners who know when and where it's safe to conduct field work. It also means that you have to be flexible on when you're willing to say, okay, we're not going to visit in person. We don't think it's safe. We're going to try remote data collection or remote treatment instead. And so that meant that we had in many places to deliver EOR not in person, which is ideal, but over the phone. Our partners had experience doing that for years. So their perspective was that it's clearly a second best. We'd rather be there in person, but in cases where we're worried about safety, it's much better than nothing. So not in most cases, but I want to say maybe in 20 or 30% of our villages, we have EOR delivered remotely. Of course, one thing we'll be able to test is whether benefits there look similar to or not compared to the in-person delivery. Conditions are not only dangerous, but also changing rapidly. That requires, like I mentioned, a highly informed and dynamic set of local partners. The major earthquake that I'm sure most of you heard about also, seriously disrupted our timeline, stretched things out a little bit. But with some flexibility, I think don't make it impossible to continue to run a study like this. Of course, the population itself is hard to study, because it's highly mobile. Right? Rural Myanmar has a lot of displaced persons, so refugees, internally displaced persons, and even they might be there at one point in time when you go to collect data, but then gone later on. And so our solution was to think about the unit of analysis not as a household, but as a village. Right? So the village is both the unit at which we randomize the program. Villages either get the program or they don't, but they're also the unit that we study. So if we come back at endline and the people that we didn't talk to at baseline aren't there, that's okay. We can talk to other households in the village to understand what's happening at the village level. That sort of strategy requires there to be pretty good dissemination of the information that's provided, which we think is reasonable here because we got as many people from the village to attend the sessions as we could, and we'll be able to look, as I mentioned, specifically at whether people are talking to each other in the village about what they learned during that session. Implementation constraints working across basically the whole country, with just a couple regional exceptions. That means that we can't have a single implementing partner deliver a uniform program everywhere. Some people think of that as a design weakness. I really don't. The reason is that in practice, EOR is implemented by many partners with content that's tailored to a specific location. So, what we estimate here, whatever we find, is going to be some average effect of EOR as delivered by different partners. But that's exactly how EOR is delivered in real life. So we'll learn something about how EOR is actually done. I was also asked to mention when results will be available. Interventions were completed at the end of last year. Endline data collection was completed, I think, literally last week. I haven't received the data yet, but hope to within a week or two, and hopefully we'll have preliminary results in the middle of this year, and then final results a little bit later. Certainly reach out to me at any point. My email's here, or you can find me online. If you want an update, I'm certainly happy to share whatever we have at that point. Right, with that, I'll turn it back to you, Caroline, and thank you everybody for your time.
Thank you so much, Travis. So Beckham Shala is having a bit of connection troubles. Maybe we'll start with questions, and then if he's able to join, that will be great. Dr. Tugma, I think your screen is still shared. If you wouldn't mind stopping sharing your screen, that would be great.
Tugma, est-ce que vous pouvez arrêter le partage? Non, bon, est-ce que c'est pas commandant Korogo? Si vous pouvez arrêter le partage, s'il vous plaît.
Vous voulez que j'ai pas bien compris?
J'ai dit que je pense que votre écran, c'est toujours partagé. Voilà, c'est mieux maintenant. Merci, merci.
And I'll invite our panelists to turn your cameras back on as we get started with questions. As a reminder, please put any questions that you have in the Q&A chat, but I also have quite a few questions. So maybe to get started, Dr. Wild, you now having completed this pilot, it would be interesting to understand as you're working on scaling this work, what questions do you see as being key to still needing to be answered before you're able to fully scale?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the gold standard is patient outcomes, and we don't have that data. It's super challenging to obtain, requires a lot of resources. So that'd be the ideal in a future iteration. As I mentioned, we're also in the process of evaluating our trainings at the community level. It's easier to monitor the quality of our own focal points than care that might be delivered by someone they would go on to train. And that's obviously a really important part of this and something we're trying to avoid because without being overly critical of other efforts, it's relatively easy to put forward a layperson first responder training and show X number of individuals were reached or confidence scores improved. But we're really trying to go beyond that to reassure ourselves that what we're being taught in communities is high quality care and performed appropriately. And there are concrete outcome measures, but we're also doing stuff absolutely constantly behind the scenes that I think is equally important. Like we have a WhatsApp thread with, dozens of our community focal points, and we get videos all the time of their trainings, and we're talking all the time about, like, don't forget to hold the head when you're doing your log roll. So, there are research paper type data that are important, and then there's just life, and it requires a lot of maintenance actually to maintain a certain level of quality. So I think when we're scaling, it's relatively easy. I mean, it's actually not easy, but it's achievable for us to do that right now as a small group that knows each other. But when we're trying to support other teams deploying this in other contexts, it's a little bit hard to protocolize that when it's sort of team dynamic dependent, but I think doable and super important. Thanks for the question.
Sure, Tugma and Commandant Korogo. From the implementation side, I would imagine that implementing programs like this is not easy on its own, let alone adding a research element to that work. So I'd be interested to hear from you both. What was the motivation behind adding research to this work, and how has that both been a challenge or an opportunity for your teams?
Bon, est-ce que vous avez compris bien? Elle a
Je
demandé
demande
un
si
peu
cela
concernant
définit
l'évaluation.
bien c'est un challenge.
Oui, mais particulièrement les aspects d'évaluation et la recherche, parce que c'est déjà difficile de travailler sur le terrain. Donc, quand on ajoute les aspects d'évaluation et de recherche, bon, comment est-ce que vous trouvez des solutions, quoi?
Peut-être que je vais aller. Pour moi, j'allais dire que c'est une continuité parce que je suis dans un service où nous avons un volet recherche et action. Et lorsque nous avons des soucis, nous associons toujours la recherche pour nous trouver des solutions rapidement, pour nous aider à mettre fin aux épidémies, aux urgences de santé publique de façon générale, en nous trouvant donc les solutions les plus à même d'arrêter rapidement l'urgence. Donc, c'est une opportunité.
D'accord, merci, je vais traduire. Et bon, interpréter un peu. The chorus, the structure that Dr. Tugma works for is uniquely positioned because they're actually a sort of, they do both epidemic response as well as, mass casualty and insecurity. So they're used to using research to guide their reactions. So that's already been part of their work and therefore isn't a foreign element to introduce. Doesn't make it easy, but they have a really wonderful mindset about that, and I'm excited to work with them. I think their evaluation framework is actually probably more robust than what we've used in our pilot. Je ne sais pas, Commandant Koroko, si vous aimeriez ajouter quelque chose. Votre micro s'est coupé.
OK. Bien, pour nous, en ce qui nous concerne en tant qu'autorité nationale, cette fois-ci, j'y vais en français pour être plus précis.
Pas de souci.
En tant qu'autorité nationale, notre but, c'est d'assurer la quiétude, on va dire, de toute la population, gérer tout ce qui est programme et politique de sécurité dans le pays. Donc, ça nous intéresse vraiment de participer à la formation, surtout formation sur l'éducation au risque des différentes populations. Notre but, c'est de former le maximum possible de gens de la population pour éviter ces problèmes. Et bien sûr, nous sommes intéressés de récolter tout ce qui est statistique, voilà, lié aux incidents, liés au nombre de victimes et bien sûr, combien de gens dans la population ont été formés. Ces statistiques nous intéressent beaucoup et bien sûr, cela nous aide à ajuster la politique nationale en matière de réponse à la menace EEI surtout. Voilà, merci.
Merci beaucoup. Je vais traduire. Donc, Commandant Korogo is saying that for, as the national body that's in charge of protecting the population or developing a strategy to protect the population from the threat of IEDs at all levels, both at, security, political level, and also individual victim assistance. Anything that pertains to the number of, individuals trained in risk education and first aid is relevant to them and helps them guide at a sort of national strategic level the country's response. And I'll just add that the CNCI has done an absolutely beautiful job recently with their Article 7 report, which is a transparency report to the Anti-Personnel Mine Ban Convention on the current state of their national, counter ID strategy. And this fits very well into that. So I'm can't highlight enough how lucky we are to have them both with us today. It's not possible to do this work whatsoever without the partnership with both of these authorities. Thank you all.
Wonderful. And before I ask my next question, welcome, Beckham, Shala. We're so excited that you're able to join us today. I have one more question for Dr. Wild and your colleagues before I hand it over before we go back over to Myanmar. You've also talked about pretty significant policy impacts of this work already. Could you talk a bit about how that came about and what levers your team was able to pull in order to make that happen?
Yeah, this is the lovely part of being actually in the field and then sort of at the Geneva level, and it's been a total honor. I've been with, Commandant Kurogo's predecessor, the last Secrétaire Permanent of the National Arms Control Commission. We were together in Cambodia and got to see that action adopted. It's also the first time we were able to write a victim assistance portion of the United Nations Secretary General's report on counter IEDs. And victim assistance does not typically feature prominently in policy dialogue on improvised explosive devices for reasons that we don't have time to get into. So it really was, I can't commend highly enough, despite many challenges, the CNCI's efforts to file an effective Article 7 report. And it's this level of rigor in terms of their engagement with international structures, despite all the challenges in the field, that I think allows us to effectively cross-pollinate between, you saw our community photos, like being in the dirt and making splints out of cardboard, and being in Cambodia, getting an international treaty modified to reflect that. So couldn't have done it without my colleagues on the call, and thanks for the question.
Over to Myanmar. Beckham, thank you so much for joining us. Like I said, I would love to just hand it over to you to share a bit about the work that Community Safety Partnerships is doing, as well as the challenges and opportunities, similar to the question before, that come with partnering with researchers to evaluate the work that you're doing. Over to you.
Sure. Thank you, Caroline. Well, first, I'm really, really sorry for being so late. It's been really, really stressful. Last night, I do not know why it was not accepting my email address. I've tried every trick in the book, but I think your incognito one helped. Thank you very much for taking the time and for the patience. My name is Beckham Shala. I'm from the Community Safety Partnerships, which is a UK-based organization. And I'm going to briefly talk to you a little bit about a study that was done recently in Myanmar. Unfortunately, I was really looking forward to previous presentations, including Travis' one, because I worked with him closely on this, but was not able to see the results yet. So that's another downer for really joining late. But I'm sure maybe I can sort of seduce him to brief me later at some stage. Now let me just try to kind of share my screen without signing myself out, because I know it's going to take me a really long time to get back in. I noticed Hannah was kindly translating into English. Does it need to go through translation, or am I being understood?
No, it's fine. My colleagues can understand English. Thank you.
Okay, wonderful. Let me just bear with me until let me just bear with me for a second until I find the right window to share. Um, Can you see that?
It's still loading, but
Yes.
yes, we can see.
Okay, great, thank you. Let me just quickly. Okay. So basically, just a little bit in relation to operating context in Myanmar, where this study or this project has really taken place. As a background, really, Myanmar at the moment reports some of the highest number of incidents in the world. I think last year we were in the highest, maybe this year we're second. But as things stand, the situation is not great. We have a context where we have highest number of incidents in the world, and EREs are only means of saving lives. There's victim assistance, also slightly limited, but there's absolutely no clearance or no EOD or no appropriate surveys taking place. This project has really saw an ERE delivery, which I'm sure sort of Travis has touched on it. But what it was about really is there's risk education delivery sessions happening in Myanmar in various areas. What this did do is we had a pre-survey form, and that had about approximately 10 questions, all related to the session. And then we would deliver the ERE session in itself. And then immediately after the session, we did a post-ERE survey form, asking similar question to the same group of people, and to find out really whether there has been any increase in knowledge as a result of that delivery session. And then after that, there was a bit more formal and a larger questionnaire, which was the livelihood questionnaire. Obviously, Myanmar security situation is not great, and this project has had to, pretty much all of the risks that were identified during the project stage have all materialized. So instead of working with 2 partners, we have had to work with 15 local organizations. As the conflict spread in certain areas, and as parties to the conflict started recruiting and conscription, we basically both of these issues through some significant challenges to the project. We then had an earthquake as well, but we have been able to overcome all of these by expanding the network of organizations, and as a result, we were able to deliver both ERE and pre and post questionnaires in 356 villages. In terms of challenges, other than just security and logistical issues that Myanmar presents at you, unfortunately, these days, I think probably one key challenge with partners was for them to be able to understand that this was not really a response, it was more of a study and a research study. So when we selected partners and given them sampling of villages, they found it very difficult why we were able to. So, for example, that we would identify 10 villages where there has been incidents of landmines and where there has been no ERE session delivered. As part of research, what we needed to do is make sure that, for example, 5 villages that have 5 of those villages do cover. We cover with the other 3, but not the other 5, and that's just to allow the study to be able to make contrasting later. It was very challenging for partners to be able to deliver in one area and not on the second one in the other area, adjoining villages which share similar needs. So I think that was a bit challenging, but what we're going to try to do is now we're trying to raise funding to go after the study is complete, really, to go to some of these villages that we have not been able to deliver ERE and provide to them as well, not as part of study, but hopefully as part of a project. An interesting thing that this study has identified was that our thoughts were that Myanmar is, although ERE is the only means of saving lives, is pretty well covered. Most of the areas, there's a pretty good reach. I think we normally reach about 1 million people per year as a sector. Because of this study, we needed to find areas where led us towards areas where there has been no ERE provision before. We were quite surprised in how many villages we were able to identify actually that have had no ERE. And I think the study in itself has identified a critical gap. It feels that we're delivering a lot of ERE in certain areas. And this is all, by the way, driven by security and conflict and administrative issues such as permissions and accessibility in certain areas with certain authorities. So all of that has had an impact. And as a result, it feels like a lot of ERE is happening in certain areas and no ERE is happening in other areas. I think that's really a key opportunity for us to take it forward with other organizations and coordination bodies as well. We have also, as part of the study, we've included a question about contamination. I was really surprised that half of the respondents have reported contaminated areas in their villages. I guess one thing I haven't really covered very well is what was interesting with the post and pre data is that our average score is 7 out of 8, which is remarkable. These questions have allow your team to be able to fine tune them. If a certain message is not really being delivered correctly, that's a low score, and that means that we would need to work on it next time. So I think this has been a really key learning for a lot of our partners. In relation to data, so now we have a lot of information in relation to pre and post studies, a lot of information where people have reported incidents of landmines, and a lot of information where reports of landmines themselves have been identified. We've received a lot of photos of various items that people are seeing. So what we're going to do with this is we're going to share a lot of this information with our partner network, and hopefully this will mean we will be able to target a little bit better, contribute to targeting towards seeing whether we can deliver ERE in some of these areas where we feel at the moment not much is being delivered. And hopefully this data, once we share it with with coordination bodies and a lot of our partners, hopefully that will really start making programming decisions better in future. Overall, as part of this project, in a nutshell, I think Myanmar really scores really badly in relation to where the sector is as things stand in relation to landmine action. There's an ongoing landmine use. All parties to the conflict are laying landmines. Some of them are a bit more sparingly. Few of them are not laying them at all because they feel that they're sort of stepping more themselves on them rather than the opposition party. And it's just been one of the other issue with landmines in Myanmar is the way the landmines that are being laid up are not being laid by the conventional armies, therefore nothing is being recorded. There's no patterns whatsoever. What's happening here is what we know, what we call in the sector as a nuisance mining. So basically, there's no pattern whatsoever of landmines. You may find one or two, and then you walk, then maybe 100 meters later, you find another one. So there's no pattern, which is going to be really challenging for clearance. As things stand, in a typical minefield, if you're a deminer, once you find a signal and once you find that first mine, and your colleague finds the second, normally that's celebrated within the team because we feel that we have identified the row of landmines. And when you've identified the row of landmines, you can follow it, and it just makes that targeting clearance a lot easier. Whereas Myanmar, we will be able to get a signal maybe for one landmine, and there'll be no signals for a while. So it's going to be really challenging when it comes to clearing in future. Even though ERE is the only means of saving lives, it feels that it's still very limited. And obviously, as I mentioned earlier, there's significant gaps in coverage in some of the high-risk areas that are reporting landmines, and victims, but no ERE is taking place. So in future, what we're really trying to do as a result of this project, what's going to drive it forward, is hopefully we want to be able to secure some funding and deliver some ERE in these areas where we have done the sampling, but we have not been able to reach them. We feel that because demining is currently not allowed and it's going to take a while, and given also that's in the middle of the conflict, we feel that the marking of some hazardous areas will be really important. Areas where we know there's landmines. In some areas, landmines are completely visible. What we would love to do is mark these areas, so at least then there's a physical barrier. As people are returning, we've got over 3 million people, IDPs in Myanmar at the moment. So as they're returning into their areas because the fighting has ceased, if there's marking, at least they'll be able to see demarcated areas with skull and crossbones, conventional marking signs. And that potentially all parties to the conflict will allow it. We feel it's quite a quick win. So I think we're going to advocate for it.
Sorry to jump in, Beckham. If you wouldn't mind, I'll give you 30 more seconds to wrap up. We're just a bit over time, but thank you so much.
So 30 seconds. But yeah, I think the other thing is what we're trying to do is promote limiting the use of landmines. There's a lot of areas that are being contaminated, or areas that civilians using them. So I think we're advocating, we're discussing them to make sure we have an international campaign to ban landmines, which talk to the state parties, but less so to non-state actors. And I think that's what we're trying to do. And also really create a dialogue, an environment where organizations as well as armed groups and authorities are talking about really demining. What we would love to do here in Myanmar is act a bit earlier, not leave landmine contamination to become a significant issue, another Cambodia or another Angola, where we're dealing with the issue for generations. So I think what we're trying to do here in Myanmar is, as part of our advocacy, really try to limit the use of landmines in one hand to prevent generations of clearance, and on the other hand, really enable demining and marking. That brings me to an end. I'm really sorry for running over time slightly.
Wonderful. Thank you so much to all of our panelists and everyone who joined us today ahead of International Mine Awareness and Assistance in Mine Action Day. Unfortunately, we are out of time, so our questions are a bit limited. If you have additional questions, you're welcome to email them to humanitarian@poverty-action.org, and we'll happy to forward them on to any of our panelists. Stay tuned for more evidence coming out of this exciting initiative. We would love to stay in touch and encourage you to reach out both with questions and additional opportunities to partner. Thank you all. Have a lovely rest of your day. And thank you once again to all of our panelists.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for organizing.